This is
Summer,
Karen,
Zuriel,
and we are here with a news report over the historical periods of the Vietnam War and Afghanistan. But how are these similar? To begin, we will discuss the origin. What was the Vietnam War?
Vietnam was the longest war in American history and the most unpopular American war of the 20th century. It resulted in nearly 60,000 American deaths and an estimated 2 million Vietnamese deaths. Even today, many Americans still ask whether the American effort in Vietnam was a sin, a blunder, a necessary war, or whether it was a noble cause or an idealistic. It failed effort to protect the South Vietnamese from the government.
How did the Vietnam War start?
Between 1945 and 1954, the Vietnamese waged an anti-colonial war against France, which received $2.6 billion in financial support from the United States. The French defeated at the Dien Bien Phu was followed by a peace conference in Geneva. As a result of the conference, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam received their independence, and Vietnam was temporarily divided between an anti-communist South and a communist North. In 1956, South Vietnam, with America backing, refused to hold unification elections. By 1958, communist-led guerrillas known as the Viet Cong had begun to battle the South Vietnamese government. So how did the Afghanistan war start?
Given that the United States and the UK are already heading towards the 9th year of a potentially multi-decade conflict, it is appropriate to reflect on the origins of war in the autumn of 2001. In the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 atrocities, there were two broad options by way of a U.S. response. One was to react to the attacks by treating them as appalling acts of mass transnational criminality. If so, then the perpetrators and those al-Qaeda elements behind them would be seen as criminal elements, albeit motivated by a warped and brutal version of one of the most important of the world's monotheistic belief systems. Such inappropriate would have involved a long, persistent, and wide-ranging operation to bring all those involved to justice. It would have had very widespread support given the international sympathy for the United States, but could have taken years to complete.
So now for the political aspects of both of the wars. For the Vietnam War. 3 weeks after the Japanese surrendered in World War II, Communist leader Ho Chi Minh staged a violent attempt to overthrow the government, disposing of the pro-French Emperor of Vietnam. U.S. President Harry Truman deemed its advantages to America to restore France as an ally against potential Russian expansion in Europe. This disposing of the pro-French Emperor of Vietnam. U.S. President Harry Truman deemed its advantages to America to restore France as an ally against potential Russian expansion in Europe. This encouraged France to restore its authority over Indochina. In December 1946, with American approval, France drove Ho back. She went back into the jungle, restored Bao Dai, and set up 3 nations: Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Political aspect of the Afghanistan war.
To begin, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979 to secure a Soviet-friendly Afghan government, and as a result of the invasion, the U.S. through the CIA gave aid to the Afghan Mujahideen to later branch out both the Taliban and al-Qaeda. Now we will go on to the social aspects of the Vietnam War.
Due to very few Americans supporting the war, the populace mostly dealt with it indirectly. More than 750 novels, 250 films, and 100 short story collections, and 1,400 personal narratives have been published. LBJ's Great Society programs competed with the war for scarce resources, who might have supported loyal liberal programs turned against the president as a result of the war. The war also made Americans more cynical and less trustworthy in the government and authority. Now for the social aspects of the Afghanistan war.
Civil war has brought a variety of social ills in Afghanistan, such as poverty, interethnic strife, inequality of women, and widespread thievery, kidnapping, and banditry. Blood feuds handed down through the generations are legendary, and revenge is regarded as a necessary redress of wrongs. And now on to the economic aspects of the Vietnam War.
The U.S. government spent around $350 billion to $900 billion on the Vietnamese War, including veteran benefits and interest, which left a heavy burden on its economy. The impact of the war hurt the economy and agriculture. LBJ and the Great Society program announced a war on poverty and tried to quietly escalate the war in Vietnam. It didn't work. The escalation of the war fueled inflation and also increased food prices. Now for the cultural aspects of the Vietnam War.
The modern nation-state of Afghanistan has formed as a result of two main factors: the colonial rivalry between Russia and the British in Central Asia, and its interval subjugation of different nations and ethnicities by the rulers of Afghanistan. Despite having a diverse political culture at the national level and being a multinational country, the Pashtun culture and kinship structure has configured the nature in Afghanistan over the last 2 centuries. Since the mid-18th century, when the Pashtuns were brought to power by Ahmad Shah Abdali in 1747, their political culture has been a defining factor of Afghanistan's national politics. And now we will show a short film of the Vietnam War.
Okay. Now Zuriel will explain the degree to which they demonstrate continuity and change over time. He will then analyze whether things stay the same or changed.
Alright, so for the Vietnam and Afghanistan war, they actually did stay the same, and they actually did change as well. So the first thing, what happened with, that stayed the same, was that there wasn't really any significant battles like the Civil War or the American Revolution. There weren't any significant points or where there was a change or any continuity at all. Second point, that how they were similar, was that both wars did drag for 12 years. Like World War I and World War II, they're only 4 years because they were pretty significant. But honestly, with them, they honestly went into the war without any reason. All they wanted to do was just stop communism. So they really honestly dragged the war along for 12 years for both of them, and to this day, even Afghanistan, it's still going along in the present. Alright, and the last similarity that they had between Vietnam and Afghanistan war is that there wasn't really a clear winner for both. There wasn't an official document actually saying that who won, who surrendered, or who actually won and got the reward or whatever. So that's
So are both wars necessary?
In my opinion, I feel like Vietnam was kind of necessary to not spread the communism, but honestly, Afghanistan was.
Now for your special guest to talk about statistics of both wars.
The Vietnam statistics. About 3 million people were killed altogether in the war. The goal of the war was to prevent communism. 2 million Americans served in the Vietnam War. It was the longest war in American history until Afghanistan. Of the 58,000 deaths, 47,000 were soldiers, and 11,000 were non-combat deaths. The Afghanistan statistics, it was the longest war in American history, and it's still somewhat going on to this day. Over 2,000 troops died in Afghanistan. The goal was oil and to stop the spread of terrorism. Over the course of 13 years, 831,000 troops served in one tour in Afghanistan. What do the modern issues say about our progress or lack of progress in America today?
Well, basically, sir, in Vietnam, the U.S., all they try to do is keep North Vietnam out of South Vietnam and not help them become an independent nation. See, what we did in South Vietnam, we just abandoned them and let them fall through the fate. Whereas in Afghanistan, we're trying to rebuild a prosperous country where they can stand without U.S. support and backing.
Did we learn anything as a nation in this time between the two events?
I feel like we did because we're trying to actually help this country instead of let them. Because in South Vietnam, they were completely dependent on U.S. economic and military backing, whereas we're trying to make it to where Afghanistan is a completely independent nation.
What advice would you give to others about repeating the mistakes of the past?
See, my advice would be just not to abandon what you started and see it all the way through to the end.
This now concludes our presentation about the Vietnam and Afghanistan War. This is Summer,
Jordan.
Karen.
And Zuriel.
signing out.
Bye.
Why does it look blurry?
Turn it off.
Alright.
It's the longest war in American.
Like, is it like on your phone or? Stop. Got backstage.
Mufford. Mufford.
Alex. Karen, you gotta get it.
Mufford.
Ready?
The whole thing.
I'm ready.
Oh my god.
Whoa!
Here you go.
How's it going in there? Karen has an extra key to the door.
Yeah.
We're gonna come in, okay?
Why are there